few weeks ago, I did a video on the aesthetics of old money. One of the common items found in the homes of people from old money, not surprisingly, is treasures acquired on their travels. Since we're coming up on the biggest vacation season of the year, I thought tips for treasure hunting while traveling might be fun. As I was avoiding working, I distracted myself by watching, I'm embarrassed to admit, Bridgerton. Romance is not really my thing. It's the sets I watch for, so I'm not going to critique the series. No need to be negative. I will leave that to others. But something caught my eye. This is the home of Penelope and Colin. Notice what's on the walls: a variety of seashells, a fossilized ammonite, several types of coral. In the cabinets are more collections, including an animal skull and pieces of what I assume are Greek sculpture. We have a vague notion that Colin's grand tour of continental Europe, which was common for young men of his class in that period, was formative for him. It seems the set designers were more interested in giving Colin a personality than the script writers were. Ouch! There's even another character in the series who travels to faraway locations to study the natural world. The 17 and 1800s was the era of world travel that inspired cabinets of curiosity containing all the interesting natural items wealthy gentlemen, always men, collected and displayed. These collections were the original beginnings of the history museums we visit today. Anthropology then grew out of those early studies of the natural world as travelers were curious about the native people they encountered in exotic regions, bringing home examples of their native crafts and art. After the arrival of steam travel in the late 1800s, even Americans, including women now, traveled to major European cities. A very good book and movie set in the late 1800s is Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Americans came back from their travels with art and fashion from Paris. Often they shipped back European china and crystal to adorn their tables. In the movie, May even had her hands sculpted while they were in Paris. More changes in transportation allowed people of wealth to discover new places, this time with the advent of automobiles and roads. Driving in rural areas, both at home and abroad, exposed people to regional folk art, from wood carving and quilting to primitive painting. Abby Aldrich Rockefeller began her folk art collection in 1929, right as her husband was getting involved in the Williamsburg restoration. Her collections ended up in her home and a museum, but she also inspired others to seek out previously unrecognized art. So far, we've identified several types of objects people from old money collected as they traveled: found items from the natural world, ancient man-made objects and objects from other cultures, finely crafted household items, contemporary or personal art, and folk art. You're probably having a couple of different thoughts. First being, hey, I actually have some of those things that I've acquired over the years. And second, well, lots of those items would be impossible to acquire today without a staggering budget. But I'm going to give you one more thought. If you look in the right places, you can bring home treasures reminiscent of virtually all those items. Now, vacations come in all varieties: a week at the beach or a lake house, a cabin in the mountains, even a hunting lodge for Europeans from old money, a road trip exploring a national park or historic sites or an unfamiliar region, maybe visiting a big city with rich culture and museums, or an international trip, or even a staycation. Every one of these options can provide multiple opportunities for treasure hunting. The places I look are obviously the natural world, little galleries and studios in offbeat places, regional arts and crafts, flea markets and market squares and antique and secondhand shops, and museum gift shops. Now it's time for me to share what I and my family have collected over the years, and I will tell you where the objects were found and share any particularly good stories.
Probably the easiest, least expensive way to begin collecting as you travel is to look for natural objects. Largest thing here is the seashell. My husband got this when he was in El Salvador. I'm also the queen of sand dollars, and if there's one sand dollar on the beach, I will find it. I don't happen to have a very large collection at the moment because my grandchildren like to take them away. Seashell shops. I love seashell shops, and so when I see something really interesting, I'll snag it and bring it home. And just roaming around outside, all kinds of things. And this is a jewelry chest that I picked up for a couple of dollars at a thrift store, and I painted it, and it becomes the repository of interesting things that we just find around. So some pressed flowers, some feathers, wheatback pennies, which I still get in my change sometime, a dead bee, the insides of a broken sand dollar, and there's the broken sand dollar, pressed leaf. And here are some seeds that came from the gift store at Mount Vernon. And my big indulgence here was butterflies that I picked up at the gift store at Meyer Gardens in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They always have a butterfly exhibit. I planned this purchase, so it was really great fun. I love that. Now, so easy to find these kinds of objects. It rained last night. I went outside to pick up branches because that always happens after a storm. It knocks things out of the trees, and lo and behold, this bird's nest from the tree, and it looks like it fell from quite a bit of a height, so it's not in real great shape, but about once a year I come across a bird's nest just in my regular amblings around the house.
Huge pine cones collected with my father on a trip to Lake Tahoe. Deer antlers from a hunting trip that my grandfather made many, many years ago. Fossils that I picked up, actually purchased in a shop, and Petoskey stones. If you think fossils are difficult to find, I would recommend having a trip to Michigan and looking for Petoskey stones. They look like this. They're fossilized coral that's become a rock. They are very common to find around on the lake shore, but if you don't get to the lake shore, you can go to a Home Depot and buy a sack of gravel for a few bucks, rinse it off, and I guarantee you there will be Petoskey stones in there. In an old Arthur Fromer guidebook, I read that he recommended that you buy art when you travel because you could either get a tube and roll things up, or you could pack them flat in your suitcase so they'd be easy to transport. Now, in 2010, I spent 5 or 6 weeks in Geneva, Switzerland, and they had a flea market twice a week. So I thought, I'm going to go look for my daughters for a gift. So I have 3 daughters, and I found 2 watercolors that were alpine landscapes, probably just painted by hobbyists, but I thought they were sweet and the girls have enjoyed them. And I also found this etching actually signed by the artist. There are 2 signatures, so it's not just a copy. He was actually involved in it. And this is Marion Plotz in Munich, which I knew the other daughter would enjoy. Now, in Russia, they're a warm, generous people. Nobody goes there anymore, obviously, but they don't have a lot of money. And a very common thing that people do is they paint, and they also give art as gifts. Now, these were bought by my daughter from street artists. They were not stretched, so they were less expensive and easier to pack. She's had them all stretched, but not all framed yet. This one, I believe, I could be wrong, I think was a gift from someone that she met in Kazakhstan. This one was a gift to my mother by a Russian family. Again, I think that they stayed with. This was a gift to my son from a Russian friend that he made. It's very dear to him. And this was a gift to me, and Daniel says it's very typically Russian, a little mountain scene painted on birch bark. I think we would all do well to have gifts that are a little more thoughtful and personal. Now, growing up, my family often traveled to Santa Fe, and there were artists in the town square in the summertime that would do pastel portraits for anybody that sat down for them, just right there. And my mom watched around and found her favorite artist and had him do a pastel rendering of myself and my sister on one side and my brother on the other. I'm the middle child. For years, my mother would go back and forth and travel around Central Texas, and I would always say, bring me a bluebonnet picture. And she didn't find one. So I actually found this one at an estate sale in Colorado. But it was made by an artist, I believe 1939 is the date on it, from Palestine, Texas, and she actually had a little studio and was well known for her artwork in local circles. And in the little town that we raised our family in, Evergreen, Colorado, there is a little gallery, and this is a signed numbered print from a local artist. Columbine is the state flower, and you can see it is numbered, a run of 100 prints, and this was number 6. The lower the numbers are, the better they are. This was a gift, a Maine artist. Some friends went to Maine. I think I watched a pet or something, and they brought me this. And it's a regionally recognized graphic artist from Maine. This came from the Louvre gift shop, not part of their collection. It was a Renoir printed on canvas, which I just loved. The Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, if you've not been there, if you love Van Gogh, definitely must visit. And they have more of his works than any place else in the world. And this is one of his less well-known later periods that I absolutely love. These are just some little prints from Bruges, Belgium, and they're sold by little street vendors. In Nashville, a little touristy shop. And these are just doors of famous buildings in Nashville. That reminds me of that trip. Canterbury Cathedral in England. Most of the cathedrals have an opportunity for visitors to make brass rubbings. It's a little fundraiser, and it's very inexpensive, and those came back from one of my early trips to England. Now, many regions are famous for their production of certain items. In Oberammergau, in the Bavarian region of Germany, they are famous for their wood carving, and my mother bought this one years ago, and it's a true work of art. This little carafe came from the glass factory in Murano, Italy, which is known as Venetian glass because it's right there, and my father bought it for his mother. The porcelain factories in England, there are a number of them all over the place, but the English ones are very famous. And you can tour the factory, and then there'll be a little gift shop adjacent. And many regions have local potters, and this is from a local potter in Fredericksburg, Texas. And again, I've been to Fredericksburg many times, so I recognized this when I found it in a thrift store. And if I'd been in Fredericksburg, I would have bought something like that. Mexico, they make little handmade nativities. Not the world's greatest art, but they're really fun to have. And my father brought me back from a trip into Mexico.
Swiss cuckoo clocks. This is a little cottage made by a fiber artist. She displays her work at Evergreen Galleries, and she is actually still alive, but I bought it directly from the artist, oh, almost 40 years ago. Beautiful little work of art. Um, this is a copy of a fragment of an Egyptian stone carving of an owl that is part of the collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I love buying things from museum gift stores. And we were most recently in New York City and went to the Folk Art Museum there, right across from the Lincoln Center, and it's free. And I always feel compelled to buy something if the admission is free. And this is a seed pod bird, handmade in Zimbabwe by a mother and a daughter. And each little bird was different, and really fun to choose which bird I wanted. This little cottage came from a little gift shop in England. The artist who makes these, they're kind of mass produced but limited runs, and they're very collectible. I only have one, but charming little cottages. This is a ceremonial dagger, probably purchased in a market somewhere in the Middle East. In the early 1930s, my great-grandmother made a world tour, and she came back with this dagger, which is made from bone and ebony, and every child has played with for 90 years. So how wonderful for a trip to be remembered over 90 years later by the family because of the things that were purchased. She also purchased this silk needlework, I believe in China, while she was there, and it was seriously put in a box and never even pulled out until I pulled it out probably about 30 years ago and hung it in my home.
My great-grandmother also bought tobacco chests for each of her 3 granddaughters. And on top of it, I have a piece of very common Russian enamelware, I suppose. Well, it's wood with paint on it that's sold to the tourist trade in Russia. And Daniel came back from Russia with a lot of that, and that's the one piece I do display. Now, when my family went to Europe when I was in college, my mother went into a secondhand store in Switzerland. It was the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and it was like a little old lady who ran the place, and she kind of thought she was selling junk. And my mother found this copper milk jug and wanted to buy that, and you could tell the lady was like, what in the world are you going to do with that? And then my mother wanted this copper pot. And the lady only spoke German. And I had my college German, which was not the greatest. But the woman wanted to make sure my mother knew that she was not to cook in this pot. And, and why my mother would want to buy a pot with a hole in it, that lady could not figure out. But it is worn through, and there's a hole in the bottom of it. But very emphatic about that. But it was a secondhand store, and beautiful antique copper pieces. Now, I have found I do better in cities not like Rome, Venice, London, Paris, the really big cities. This is the open air market in Montmartre in Paris, and this is an open air artist market, and it's been around for a long time, and I'd heard about it. It's near Sacré-Cœur, and the Impressionists, Renoir, Van Gogh, Picasso, a lot of very famous people lived in this area, and they sold their artwork on the street. So I thought I would go, and surely I would discover some new unrecognized artist. But what I saw was just a bunch of kitschy stuff that was for the tourist trade. And maybe other people find things, but I certainly have not. Now I'm going to end this story with a picture that you saw at the very beginning, which is the little Cotswold cottage. This is Greenfield Village outside of Detroit. It is an open-air museum with historical buildings in it. The story is that Henry Ford loved the Cotswold region of England, and they are famous for their limestone buildings. He decided in 1929 that he wanted to buy one of these wonderful old houses and bring it and put it in Greenfield Village, but he wanted to have a particular look. And this was what was found. The original building was built in, they think, 1619, and then there was an addition put on it later. And it had a lot of windows and architecture that he really did like, and it was charming on the inside, and it's much smaller on the inside that you can imagine. But he had people go around and sketch things that were classic Cotswold items because he wanted to change the house. So in England, he had things modified. Now, probably what you'll notice at the second story, there are all those little holes in there, and those are for doves. And most people had them on their barns, but he wanted it on the house because, of course, the pigeons essentially would poop all over the house, and people wouldn't want that. They'd want it in the barn. And you probably would notice also there is a bay window that he added, and the front door was changed. And all of that was done in England. He wanted it to be exactly authentic. And then the house was taken apart. So if anybody ever accuses you of buying something that's just impossible to get back home while you're on vacation, just say, well, at least I'm not buying a house. So it was all taken apart and numbered and then put back together. And if you're thinking, well, that's absolutely insane, this type of, the scale of thing was very common in this time period because with the tax changes in England, a lot of the country houses were being dismantled because they couldn't afford the taxes. So whole rooms were being sold, the paneling and all types of things. And those have shown up in a lot of wealthy homes throughout America. And of course, the classic example of it is Hearst Castle in California, if you ever have an opportunity to visit there. But he did not go and find those things that, Mr. Hearst, that he was sold those things by someone else that bought them. But Henry Ford knew what he wanted to buy. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Happy hunting on vacation.